It's simple, Marcus. The company transitions to you in January, but I will not build a legacy for a woman who doesn't belong in this family. Choose her, and you choose to walk away from everything I built.
Mom, don't do this.
I'm not doing anything, Marcus. I'm asking you to choose.
Dana Whitfield stood in the hallway outside the study with her hand frozen on the doorframe, listening to her mother-in-law's voice drop into the tone she used only when she wanted something and expected to get it. It's simple, Marcus, Eleanor said. The company transitions to you in January, but I will not build a legacy for a woman who doesn't belong in this family. Choose her, and you choose to walk away from everything I built. Dana didn't move. She didn't breathe. Marcus said nothing for 11 long seconds, and in those 11 seconds, Dana understood something she had suspected for years but never had proof of. Eleanor Whitfield had been waiting for exactly the right moment to force this conversation into the open. If you've ever had someone try to make you the reason for a choice that was never yours to make, hit subscribe, because Dana is about to make a choice of her own, and it's not the one anyone in that house is expecting. Dana walked back to the guest room before either of them could know she had heard anything at all. She sat on the edge of the bed with her coat still on, hands cold, heart steady in a way that surprised her. She had expected to cry. Instead, she felt something close to relief, the strange calm of finally hearing out loud what she had spent years being told she was imagining. She picked up her phone and instead of opening a message to Marcus, she opened her notes app and began typing dates. Not out of vengeance. Out of a need to see the pattern laid out in front of her, in her own handwriting, so that no one could later convince her it hadn't been real. The first entry was the family vacation 2 years ago that Eleanor had forgotten to include her on, only remembering to mention it after the flights were already booked. The second was the birthday dinner rescheduled the moment Dana confirmed she could attend, then quietly unrescheduled the day after. The third was the comment made in front of the pastor about Dana's background, delivered with a smile so pleasant that even Marcus hadn't registered it as an insult. Dana kept typing, one memory unlocking the next, and by the time she reached the 12th entry, her hands had stopped shaking. She wasn't building a case to destroy anyone. She was building a case to trust her own memory again. She called her sister Renata before she called anyone else, needing a voice that wouldn't try to soften what had just happened. Renata answered on the second ring, still in her kitchen, still mid-morning on her side of the time zone, and Dana didn't bother with a greeting. She just gave Marcus an ultimatum, Dana said. Me or the company. And he didn't say no. He just sat there. Renata's face changed instantly, the warmth in it sharpening into something protective. For how long did he sit there? She asked. 11 seconds, Dana said, and even saying the number out loud made it feel heavier than it had in the hallway. Renata was quiet for a moment, then said the thing Dana needed someone else to say first. You've given that family 11 years of grace. You don't owe them an 11-second silence too. Renata asked what Dana wanted to do, and Dana admitted she didn't fully know yet. Only that she was done pretending she hadn't heard it, done letting Eleanor's cruelty happen in rooms she wasn't supposed to notice. Renata told her to write everything down while it was fresh, which Dana had already started doing, and to record anything else Eleanor said in that house, because women like Eleanor Whitfield built their power on plausible deniability, on rooms where only one version of the story ever survived. She's used to being the only witness to her own behavior, Renata said. Don't let her be the only witness this time. Dana looked at the phone in her hand, at the 11 years of notes now filling the screen, and felt the plan settle into place with a clarity she hadn't expected. Marcus found her 20 minutes later, sitting very still on the edge of the bed, phone face down beside her. He asked if she was all right, and Dana looked at him for a long moment before answering with a question instead. How long has she known this was coming, Marcus? The ultimatum. How long has she been planning it? His face changed slightly, the way a man's face changes when he has been caught holding something he didn't want seen. She mentioned it a few weeks ago, he admitted, voice low. I told her no. I told her it wasn't happening, that it was never going to be a real conversation. Dana nodded slowly, absorbing that. But you didn't tell me, she said. You let me walk into this house for Christmas without warning me your own mother was going to try to end my marriage. He tried to explain himself the way he always did, that he hadn't wanted to ruin the holiday, that he thought he could handle it quietly and make the problem disappear before Dana ever had to know it existed, that he had been protecting her from something ugly. Dana had heard versions of that sentence for over a decade, and for the first time in their marriage she said out loud what she actually thought about it. "You weren't protecting me, Marcus. You were protecting yourself from having to pick a side in front of me." The silence that followed wasn't angry. It was worse than angry. It was honest, the kind of honesty that has nowhere left to hide. And in that honesty, something in Dana finally settled into a decision she had been circling for years. She told him plainly that she wasn't asking him to fight his mother for her. She was telling him that she was done being a problem discussed in rooms she wasn't invited into, done being managed instead of defended. Marcus sat down beside her, quiet for a long stretch, turning something over that Dana could see costing him more than he wanted to admit. "I've spent my whole life being the son who keeps the peace," he finally said. "I don't know how to be anything else in this house." Dana reached over and took his hand, not out of forgiveness yet, but because she recognized the fear underneath the excuse, and she wanted him to hear the next part clearly. "Then tomorrow," she said, "you're going to have to learn." Neither of them slept well that night, the house too quiet in the way houses get when something inside them is about to change. Dana lay awake running through what she would say if given the chance, and what she would do if she wasn't. Marcus lay beside her, staring at the ceiling, wrestling with 30 years of conditioning that told him his mother's approval was the price of belonging to this family. Downstairs, unaware that she had already lost the element of surprise, Eleanor sat in the study finishing her second drink, already rehearsing how she would frame the conversation for Julian in the morning, as concern for the family legacy, never as the ultimatum it actually was. She had built an empire on the idea that she alone got to write the story of what happened in her house. Morning came gray and quiet over the lake, and Dana came down to breakfast dressed like she was going somewhere important, because in every way that mattered, she was. She found Julian already at the table, leaning against the sideboard with his usual half-smile, clearly briefed on at least part of what had happened the night before. "Morning, Dana," he said, in the tone of a man enjoying a show. "Rough night." Dana didn't answer him. She sat across from Eleanor's empty seat, poured her own coffee and waited. When Eleanor entered a few minutes later in her cream sweater and pearls, composed as always, she paused only slightly at finding Dana already seated in what had always, silently, been considered Marcus's chair. "I'd like to talk about the company transition," Dana said, before Eleanor had even reached the table. Eleanor's eyebrows lifted a fraction of an inch, the closest thing to surprise her face ever allowed itself to show. "This isn't your conversation, Dana." Dana smiled, calm and unhurried, and placed her phone face up on the table between them, a voice memo clearly labeled with the date and time of the night before. "It became my conversation," she said, "the moment you used my marriage as leverage for it." Julian straightened from the sideboard, the smugness draining slightly from his expression as he understood what he was looking at. Eleanor's hand paused on the back of her chair, her composure cracking at the edges for the first time Dana had ever witnessed in 11 years of Christmases in this house. "I recorded it," Dana said simply, into the silence that followed. "Not to hurt you, because I've spent 11 years being told I was imagining things, that I was too sensitive, too dramatic, too much. I wanted proof I could trust my own memory, for once without needing your permission to trust it." Eleanor's composure cracked further, a controlled fury replacing the practiced calm she wore like armor. "You have no right to record conversations in my house." "I have every right," Dana said, voice steady, unraised. "You told your son to choose between his wife and his inheritance, in a house I have spent a decade trying to belong in. I'm not here to destroy you, Eleanor. I'm here to tell you that the choosing is over. He already made it. He made it the day he married me." Julian, sensing an opening to redirect the room back toward familiar ground, cleared his throat. "Mom didn't mean it the way it sounded," he offered smoothly. "She just wants what's best for the family." Dana turned to him for the first time. "Then you can explain to me why what's best for the family has never once included me being treated like part of it." Julian had no answer ready, and his silence told Dana everything she needed to know about which side of this table he had already chosen, long before this morning. Eleanor, watching her younger son fail to defend her, seemed to age slightly in the space of a few seconds. The first real crack Dana had seen in a woman who had spent decades being unshakable in every room she entered. Marcus walked in mid-sentence, exactly as Dana had asked him to the night before, and stopped in the doorway taking in his wife, his mother, his brother, and the phone lying between them on the table. Dana looked at him and, for the first time in their marriage, didn't wait for him to lead. "Your mother gave you an ultimatum last night," she said. "I think it's time you gave her one back." Marcus was quiet for a moment, and Dana watched years of conflict avoidance visibly leave his shoulders, replaced by something she hadn't seen in him in a long time. He crossed the room, sat down beside Dana, and placed his hand over hers on the table. "Mom," he said, "if you ever ask me to choose between my wife and this family again, you will lose both." Eleanor's face went through something Dana had never witnessed before in 11 years. Not anger, but the particular devastation of a woman realizing her control had quietly expired without her noticing it happen. "Everything I have goes to this family," she said, her voice thinner now, less certain of its own authority. "Then it goes to us," Marcus said. "Both of us together, or it goes to no one. And I'll build something on my own the way you did, from nothing, without needing your name attached to it. Your choice, Mom. Not mine and not Dana's." Eleanor looked between her sons and her daughter-in-law, searching for the leverage point she had always been able to find in every argument before this one, and for the first time found none waiting for her. Julian, seeing which way the room had turned, tried a different approach, softer now, aimed at his mother rather than at Dana. "Maybe it's time to just let this go," he said quietly, "before it becomes something none of us can walk back from." Eleanor turned on him sharply, years of practice control fraying at the edges. "Don't you dare take her side." "I'm not taking a side," Julian said, and for the first time all morning, he sounded like he meant it. "I'm telling you that you're about to lose your son over pride, and I don't think even you actually want that." The room went very still, Eleanor's tumbler halfway to her lips, forgotten there, as she looked at her family arranged against the decision she had assumed. Until this exact moment, only she had the power to make. The silence stretched long enough that Dana almost spoke into it, but Renata's advice from the night before echoed back to her. Don't fill every silence for someone who has spent her whole life counting on other people filling it for her. So Dana waited, hands still under Marcus's on the table, and let Eleanor sit inside the discomfort of a room that was no longer under her control. When Eleanor finally spoke again, her voice had lost its edge entirely, replaced by something smaller, something almost tired. "I built this family's name from nothing," she said. "I only ever wanted to protect it." "I know," Dana said, and meant it, because underneath 11 years of cruelty, she had always suspected there was a woman terrified of losing the one thing she had spent her life constructing. "But protecting it can't mean erasing me," Dana continued, quieter now, less like a confrontation and more like something closer to an offer. "I'm not trying to take Marcus away from this family, Eleanor. I never was. I'm trying to become part of it, the way I should have been allowed to 11 years ago." Eleanor didn't answer right away, her eyes moving from Dana to Marcus to the phone still resting on the table between them, evidence of a version of herself she clearly hadn't intended anyone to see so plainly. Something in her posture shifted, almost imperceptibly, the armor loosening just enough for Dana to glimpse, for the first time, someone genuinely uncertain of what came next, in a house where uncertainty had never been allowed to exist before. Marcus stood, still holding Dana's hand, and looked at his mother with a steadiness Dana hadn't seen from him in the entire 11 years she had known him. "I love you, Mom," he said, "but I'm not going to keep choosing peace with you over honesty with my wife. That ends today, whatever you decide about the company." Eleanor studied her son for a long moment, and Dana watched her make a calculation she had clearly never expected to have to make. The cost of losing control of the narrative against the cost of losing her son entirely. For a woman who had spent her whole life certain she would never lose either, the math seemed to land somewhere Dana hadn't anticipated. somewhere that looked, for the first time, almost like defeat. "I need time," Eleanor finally said, setting the tumbler down without drinking from it. "I'm not going to pretend this doesn't need thinking through." It wasn't an apology, and Dana hadn't expected one. But it was the first honest sentence Eleanor had spoken all morning, the first crack in 11 years of controlled performance, and Dana understood that for a woman like Eleanor Whitfield, honesty without armor was its own kind of surrender. Julian, still standing near the sideboard, looked between his mother and his brother with an expression Dana couldn't quite read, somewhere between relief and something closer to envy, as if watching Marcus do something he had never had the courage to attempt himself. The rest of that day passed in a strange, careful quiet, the kind that settles over a house after something has fundamentally shifted, and no one is entirely sure yet what shape the new normal will take. Dana spent most of the afternoon with Renata on the phone, walking the property line near the lake, recounting the breakfast table conversation in full while her sister listened without interrupting, occasionally letting out a low sound of disbelief at Eleanor's attempted redirections. "You didn't yell once," Renata said finally. "I know," Dana said, surprised by it herself. "I didn't need to. I just needed her to hear herself finally out loud, the way I've been hearing her for 11 years. Renata was quiet for a moment before saying softly, "That's the part she's never going to forget." Marcus found Dana by the water as the light started to fade, sitting on the dock with her coat pulled tight against the cold. He sat beside her without speaking at first, and when he finally did, his voice carried none of the careful diplomacy she was used to hearing from him inside that house. "I should have told you weeks ago," he said, "the moment she first brought it up. I kept telling myself I was protecting you, but Renata's right and you were right. I was protecting myself from having to choose in front of you, because some part of me was afraid of what it would mean if I hesitated." Dana looked at him, at the honesty costing him visibly, and said nothing for a moment, letting him sit inside it the way she had let Eleanor sit inside her own silence that morning. "I'm not interested in being chosen out of fear, Marcus," she finally said. "I don't want you standing beside me because you're afraid of losing me. I want you standing beside me because it's obvious to you, the way it's obvious to me, that there was never actually a choice to make." Marcus reached for her hand on the dock, and this time there was nothing performative in the gesture, nothing done for an audience of his mother or his brother. "There isn't," he said. "There never was. I think some part of me has known that since the day I met you, and I just let my mother's fear become louder than my own certainty, for longer than I should have." Dana let the words settle, watching the last light disappear behind the tree line across the water. Dinner that evening was quieter than any meal Dana had sat through in that house before, Eleanor uncharacteristically subdued at the head of the table, Julian watching his mother with something like new attention, as if seeing her for the first time without the armor she usually wore so effortlessly. Halfway through the meal, Eleanor set down her fork and addressed the table directly, her voice careful in a way Dana had never heard from her. "I've spent so many years being the only one who decides what happens in this family," she said, "that I think I forgot how to ask instead of tell." No one spoke right away, the admission landing heavier in its plainness than any apology could have. Dana looked at Marcus, who looked back at her, both of them recognizing the shift for what it was, not resolution yet, but the first honest opening either of them had seen in 11 years. "I'm not asking you to like me differently overnight," Eleanor continued, looking directly at Dana for the first time all day without the usual coolness behind her eyes. "But I would like the chance to try, if you're willing to let me." Dana considered the offer carefully, unwilling to hand out forgiveness simply because Eleanor had finally, publicly, run out of leverage. "I'm willing to let you try," she said honestly. "But trying means actually changing, Eleanor, not performing change for one dinner and returning to form the moment this feels resolved. I've watched you recover from worse before." Something flickered across Eleanor's face. Not quite offense, closer to recognition, as if she understood exactly how many times in the past she had done precisely that. Julian spoke up then, quieter than his usual performative confidence, addressing his mother directly. "For what it's worth," he said, "I think she's right to be careful. I've watched you do this before too, Mom. The soft moment after the storm. I just never said anything because it was easier not to. Eleanor looked at her younger son for a long moment, absorbing that from him specifically, the son who had always taken her side without question, and something in her expression suggested this admission had landed harder than anything Dana had said all day. Maybe, Eleanor said slowly, I've had more people staying quiet around me than I realized. The table went still around that sentence, the truth of it settling over all of them at once. Over the following weeks, Dana watched carefully, deliberately withholding the easy relief of assuming everything had changed simply because one dinner had gone differently. Eleanor called ahead before visiting instead of arriving with assumptions already made. She asked Dana's opinion on the spring gala seating arrangement instead of announcing it as decided. Small things, easily missed by anyone not counting them the way Dana had learned to count everything in that family. Marcus noticed the shift too, mentioning once, almost disbelieving, that his mother had asked about Dana's work before asking about the company for the first time in memory. Dana didn't celebrate yet. She had learned across 11 years that patterns needed more than a few weeks to prove themselves real instead of performed. Renata, hearing the updates over their weekly calls, remained the steady voice of caution Dana needed. Watch what she does when nobody's specifically evaluating her, Renata said. Anyone can behave well under observation. The real test is when she thinks the pressure's off. Dana took the advice seriously, paying attention not just to Eleanor's behavior toward her directly, but to smaller things, how Eleanor spoke about her to others when Dana wasn't in the room, whether the old comments about her background resurfaced at family gatherings Dana wasn't present for. Marcus, for his part, started reporting these moments back to Dana unprompted, a habit he had never had before, evidence in its own right that something fundamental between them had shifted alongside whatever was shifting, more slowly, in Eleanor. I want you to know, Eleanor said quietly, once the papers were signed and Julian had stepped out to take a call, that I don't regret losing that argument. Dana looked at her, surprised by the specific phrasing. I've spent my whole life being right about things, Eleanor continued. Or at least being unwilling to be wrong out loud. Losing that argument to you in my own kitchen in front of my sons, it was the first time in a very long time that being wrong didn't feel like losing everything. Dana considered the admission carefully, recognizing in it something genuinely difficult for a woman like Eleanor to say, and decided finally that it was enough of an opening to build something real from, if both of them were willing to keep choosing it meal after meal year after year. 6 months later, Dana still visited the lake house every holiday, still poured her own coffee at that same long oak table, but she never again stood outside a closed door wondering what was being decided about her life without her presence in the room. Julian had started calling more often too, not out of obligation but something closer to genuine interest, occasionally admitting in his own understated way that watching his brother finally stand firm had shown him something about his own long habit of staying quiet to keep the peace. Eleanor still had her sharp edges, her occasional lapses into old patterns Dana still watched for carefully, but the balance of power in that house had shifted permanently, and everyone at that table knew it, even Eleanor, even if she never said so directly again. Dana thought back sometimes to the 11 seconds of silence outside that study door, the silence that had once felt like the end of something and turned out, instead, to be the beginning of the only version of her marriage that had ever actually been honest. She had learned, in the space of one overheard ultimatum, that love without a voice isn't peace. It's just a longer, quieter kind of erasure, one that asks you to keep shrinking until there's nothing left in the room worth noticing. And she had decided, finally, permanently, that she would rather be difficult and heard in every room she entered than easy and erased in the one room that was supposed to be hers all along. If Dana's story moved you, tell me in the comments, would you have stayed quiet outside that door? Or walked in and said something sooner? Subscribe to Last Page Stories for a new one every week, and let me know which title in this description made you click.